now.
So it'll just take a few minutes for people to, like a minute or so for people to join.
Do I need to control whose screen is on, or do I just, does
Nope.
Zoom just do that for us?
Zoom should just do it for you.
Cool.
So we're now live. So there's 52 people in the room.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Right, evening, everyone. Welcome to maybe the second or third session in this year's Cycle Touring Festival, Cycle Tour Festival 2022, all online again this year, thanks to COVID. Thanks everyone for coming along. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'll just get through a little bit of the housekeeping stuff. There'll be a Q&A session at the end of the talk. Ideally, if you can use the Q&A function within Zoom, that would be really, really helpful for me because it helps me keep track of the questions, and I'll convey the questions over at the end. But we do have the chat function as well, and I'm aware that some people use that as well. If you do go into the chat function, we love to see who's here and where you're from. So type, "Hi, I'm Steve from sunny Perthshire." Don't type that. Type who you are and where you're from. That would make more sense. If you are looking for subtitles, live captions, there should be the live caption option somewhere on your screen. So have a little play around and find that, and you can toggle that on and off. I've currently got it running now, and it is incredibly distracting. Well, we've got a few people here: Jersey, California, Bristol, Peckham, County Durham, Suffolk, Rochdale. I think so far San Francisco's winning. I mean, obviously they're all wonderful places. San Francisco's just the furthest away, isn't it?
Colorado.
Wow, Dumfries, Colorado, Cumbria. Right, I'm not going to read them all out because we'll be here absolutely all day. Last little bit of housekeeping is just to remind everyone that the Cycle Touring Festival is not a profit-making organization, but it does have overhead costs. So if you're able to donate at all, I will be putting the donate link in the chat, or you can find it on the Cycle Touring Festival website. The suggested donation is £5 per talk, or £20 for the whole shebang for the whole festival. But please, give what you can. Oh, wow. Halifax, South Tyrol, Carlisle, Cumbria, lots of cool places where people are. Okay, so right, ticked off my list. Right, so you are here to see. Oh gosh, my brain's gone completely. Sarah and Bernie, who have fat biked across South America, particularly Colombia and Ecuador. But just to give you a little bit of background, Sarah's background is in botany, or her interests are in botany, and she's just confessed to me that the bicycle is mainly a way to look at flowers up mountains. And Bernie's background is in engineering, and he's particularly keen on building bikes as well. And I'm sure that the talk is going to reflect those things. In the past, they have written in a lot of different places. I'm just looking at their website now on my screen, and it's like Morocco, Romania, Czech Republic, New South Wales, Australia, Scotland. Obviously, why wouldn't you come to Scotland? Devon and Cornwall. They are based in North Devon. And now I'm rambling, so I'm just going to pass over to Sarah and Bernie. Let's give them a little tiny round of applause and take it away.
Just a second, we just managed to lose our slideshow.
Oh, dear.
Okay, hopefully you can see our shared screen now. So hi, and thank you for joining us. And we hope you enjoy our tour of Colombia and Ecuador that we're just going to talk about. Bernie and I are both in the second half of our mid-60s and started cycle touring about 13 years ago. Today, we're going to talk about a tour we made in 2018 through two stunningly beautiful countries and the fantastic people we met and the experiences we had on our journey. As you can see here, Colombia is a large country in South America that's 4 times the size of the UK and goes from the middle of the Tropic of Cancer down to nearly the equator. The route we took is shown in red on the map. At the time we visited, Colombia was just emerging from a long civil war. FARC had recently declared a ceasefire and joined in a peaceful political process of inclusive government, or at the time it was peaceful. Most of the areas we traveled through on this trip were definitely no-go areas for many of the local population prior to the ceasefire. Colombians would not travel through them, even by car. They would take a plane and fly over them to reach the relative safety of the towns and cities. The Colombians we met were really worried by our journey and went out of their way to make sure that we were safe. Apart from Cartagena, where we started, and Bogotá, where we finished, the Colombians had no experience of foreign tourists at that time and were simply amazed when we turned up in their towns and villages. Also, no one spoke English outside these centres. And we had only done a few low-level evening classes before we went, so we had real difficulty in communicating. We often found people switched off as soon as we attempted to speak Spanish and simply assumed that they wouldn't understand what we wanted. When you first arrive in a new country, it takes a little while to get into the rhythm of the culture. Because we were away from the large cities, we had to fit in with the local customs of what time they ate, what food was served at different meals of the day, what size of village was likely to have accommodation. Was it acceptable or safe to wild camp? We soon discovered that breakfast was arepa or eggs, that lunch was 3 potato soup with chicken or beef with yucca and potato. Vegetables were very hard to come by. It was almost impossible to buy an evening meal, as everyone eats at home in the evening. In the northern part of Colombia, on the coast, there is fish, and on the plains there were fruit stalls. But as you go further south, up into the mountains, the fish and the fruit almost disappear. There is very tough beef, which is always cut along the grain and mainly cooked on open fires outside.
Our bicycles were Surly Moonlander fat bikes with 4.8-inch wide tyres, which cope with the mixture of rough rocky roads and soft volcanic sand. We carried all our own equipment, including a tent and cooking equipment, even though we rarely needed to use it. In fact, in most places, it wouldn't have been safe to camp. All land is privately owned and fenced off. Once, when there was no alternative, we got permission to camp in a school compound. Most of the time, we were in hospedaje, a small room in an outhouse with only cold water and no aircon. We only carried 2 changes of clothes, one to wear and one to wash, so we hand washed every night. Not only our clothes, but our bodies had to cope with 40 degrees centigrade in the shade on the Caribbean coast, to -7 degrees C at the top of the mountain passes, where it can snow at any time of year. We carry a GPS tracker so that our family and anyone following our blog can see where we are. It also has an SOS button, which will call the global centre, who will arrange for emergency services to help us if we get into trouble. We obviously did some research before we started, but we're travelling just the 2 of us with no backup or support. We had a vague idea of the general route we would take, but no fixed itinerary. As it turned out, we changed our route completely as soon as we arrived, having discovered about the lost city, which we decided we wanted to visit. We always aim to keep off any main tourist route and definitely off the main roads wherever possible. So our journey starts in the large city of Cartagena, mainly on roads, but with a little bit of dirt track, and along the beach in sweltering heat. At one point, the bike computer registered 53 degrees centigrade out on the road. We were struggling, having left the UK at -2 degrees centigrade in December. So we had to keep stopping, but there was almost no shade. We were drinking litres and litres of water. We rode through villages with salsa bearing out of the shop doorways, and then back into the countryside with the wind, the waves, and the birdsong. At the end of the 3rd day, we came to the only place on our whole trip we felt unsafe. There were lots of young men hanging about the roadside and army personnel carrying machine guns looking very twitchy. We had spotted some accommodation here on the map, but decided to carry on cycling and stopped a further 10 kilometers down the road. We later discovered that the youths had recently held up a petrol tanker and stolen all the fuel.
At Santa Marta, which was a rundown version of Cartagena, we found an Airbnb and organised our walk to La Ciudad Perdida, the lost city, a four-day hike up in the mountains. We walked up into the jungle and across rivers over 3 days. All the supplies were carried in by mule. It was our first meeting with truly indigenous people and their history, the way they were practically wiped out by the Spanish in the 14th century, and only rarely survived in the mountain refuge. Their treasures survived because they buried them under their houses with the dead. Anything the Spanish found were melted down and shipped back to Spain. Some of the few artifacts left unlooted are on show in the Cartagena Museum. During the walk, we became friendly with a Colombian family who would watch over us for the rest of our whole journey, and we would meet again later. These steps here had been built so that the Spanish horses couldn't charge into the city. The mountain passes here are 4,500 feet high, and we were surrounded by peaks that were 10,000 feet high. This picture is looking up to the remains of the lost city. The longest day on the walk was 11 miles. It doesn't sound far, but it was blisteringly hot and humid. All along the tracks were the most fantastic array of different plants and brightly coloured flowers and flowering trees, which to me made it all worth the effort. After spending Christmas with our Airbnb family in Santa Marta, we headed south. In South America, Airbnb is a little different from over here. It's more like being a personal house guest with good friends. Not only in Colombia, but also later, our next visit in Chile and Argentina, we found the same thing. They would take you out and show you everywhere in their car. They all like to try out our bikes, and in this case, they fell off our bikes. And here in Santa Marta, we spent Christmas with their extended family and were definitely part of the family. The first part of our journey was almost all on road. We were getting up at 5 a.m. and leaving at first light just before 6 to try and beat the heat, hoping to arrive at our destination before midday. Most days we were covering 50 or 60 miles, finding somewhere for lunch and then taking a siesta in the afternoon. We covered the 300 miles across the sweltering plains in 6 days. We stopped at Aracataca to visit the birthplace of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the writer of 100 Years of Solitude. There was quite a bit of traffic on the road and the driving was horrendous, particularly the coaches who would overtake anytime, anywhere, and whatever was coming. We spent New Year's Eve in San Alberto, lots of very loud salsa party music coming from every shop and cafe, and people letting off homemade rockets from their hands. When we left the following morning, people were still drinking and dancing. We just hoped that we weren't going to get run over by a drunk driver. But we were soon back in the countryside, and in a couple of days later, arrived at the pretty old colonial town of Giron, next to the city of Bucaramanga. While we were there, we received a phone call from Marina, the mother of the family we'd met on the Lost City walk. She was visiting her parents in Bucaramanga and wanted to call in at our hotel and check that we really were all right. She'd worked out where we were staying from our tracker on the blog website. Happy that we were really in good health, she invited us to lunch the next day and to meet her parents. How kind was that? Her disabled mother had been following her progress down through our progress down through Colombia with interest.
We had been on the road for just over 3.5 weeks, and the best part of our trip was just about to start. We left Giron, and the roads, often just sand, weaves through fertile farmland planted with vines, olives, and vegetable crops. We came to a deep valley, and having already climbed up to 3,500 feet, we plummeted down to the bridge across the reservoir at near sea level. You can see the bridge here far below us. Before climbing up in full sun the other side topping out at 5,600 feet. This is looking back across the winding road that we've just cycled up. After nearly 7 hours of cycling, we arrived at Zappatoka, full of steep cobbled streets and whitewashed buildings with orange roofs, where they were ready for another party with a stage in the main square. The warm-up acts are already on stage at 3 in the afternoon and will eventually stop at 3 in the morning. We wake up at 4:30 to the sound of rockets and car horns as a procession passes our hotel, complete with band in the back of a pickup. The Christmas and New Year celebrations go on for 6 weeks here, and every town we visit has a stage and is ready to party. The next day, we set off cross country on rocky dirt roads all day. Fantastic scenery and great cycling. We peak out at over 6,000 feet that day, arriving in Galan in time for lunch, and a lovely square and a market, festival street food, and the usual stage. Then comes the procession of Passo Fino horses, all trained to do high-speed staccato stepping, a real spectacle, but exhausting for the horses. The army are in every town, as well as the police. In Galan, the patrol were carrying a sniper rifle, as well as the usual machine guns and pistols. They come over and take an interest in our bikes. We have been told that time to worry is when you cannot see an army presence. It suggests someone else is in control. There's a lovely friendly atmosphere here, and in common with other towns, when they party in the evenings, it is the whole family together with 3 or 4 generations. And although people drink, there is not the obvious excess drinking of youth that is now so prevalent in Europe. Over the next few days, we pass through forest and over whitewater rivers on dodgy bridges. The scenery is unbelievably beautiful. We are very remote here in the Andes Mountains, climbing and descending 3,000 feet a day on the rocky roads, which had often been washed away in landslides and reinstated with bulldozers and JCBs, lorries bringing crushed rock from the nearby quarries. This was a new tarmac road where every time it rained, the embankment just descended in a pile of rocks and mud. At a small village, we stop for meals, and the kids all come out to see us and want to touch the bikes. Sometimes some of the men ask to ride the bikes around the square. People are so kind, pointing us to a little cafe or someone's house where we can get food. We pass through San Gil, which is the adventure sports center of the area, but too touristy for us. Arriving in Charalá, Eduardo, the first English speaker we had met, takes us in hand and organizes not only a hotel for tonight, but accommodation and meals at a small village farm in the next night as well. Charalá is a town that saved the Colombians from the Spanish in 1810. A small band of farmers armed with just staves and axes managed to halt the progress of reinforcements going to support the Spanish army in a battle for independence. In so doing, they ensured the final defeat of the Spanish and liberation of Colombia, although almost all 300 of them lost their lives. There is a museum and an art gallery where you can see striking paintings full of fire and angst.
The next day, we cycled to the tiny hamlet of Virolin. The road was very rough and steep, and it was hard going, especially as it had rained overnight, making everything slippery. But the views were stunning. Most of the other traffic had 4 legs, as the bus to the hamlet only ran once a day and vehicles could get no further than the village. Eduardo had contacted Adriana, who had a farm in the hamlet, and she had arranged for us to stay in their village hall and to feed us the best food yet on our trip. Everything was homemade or homegrown, including the butter and the cheese. She got her nephew, Oscar, to take us swimming in the river and said, as there was no shower, it was very cold and dark red. The hamlet of about 5 houses was very remote and rural. Adriana showed us her small holding and the crops she grew. In the evening, we met her family, who were there on holiday, and spent the evening conversing in very bad Spanish on our part, and with Google Translate. We even played a card game of Rumi, which is similar to Rummy, but with additional rules in Spanish, and they occasionally let us win. The road ended here for cars as the bridge had washed away and a new one had not yet been built, or the money had been put up for it, but corruption and one thing and another had gone astray. The following morning, we let Oscar ride my bike down to the rope bridge across the river. He helps us get both bikes across, as I don't think we could have managed on our own. Every tree around here is full of bromeliads, amazing. We head uphill through farmland and woods with birds singing and lots of babbling streams. As cars can no longer access this part of the road, it's much smoother and easier cycling, even though it's still steep. As it rains most nights, every morning starts with the mist rising up through the forest. We pass quite a few small holdings with just a few cows and buffalo each. After 12 miles, we come across a Teo commune full of very unusual people. There are some smart wooden houses with high wooden gates where we are greeted by people wearing sackcloth, looking very like Baldric from Blackadder. They invite us in for a meal, which we accept, and they find someone who speaks English who tries to get us to stay. During our travels in many parts of the world, we've come across many sects, religious groups and cultural groups who have all fed us. For example, we camped with the Mormons. We were fed by the Mennonites and they chopped firewood for us on the top of a mountain. And we stayed in a Navajo chapter house. And I've always been fascinated by what they believe and why they believe it, which has sometimes made them think that I'm interested in joining them rather than just interested, which can cause problems. Here, the Tao bring down a master who blesses us in the sacred river, which runs red with mineral pollution. I'm afraid I'm struggling not to giggle at this point, as they are taking it very seriously. What worries me is that they're drinking this water. They have no toilets but squat in the forest, and there are 300 people living here. They claim to eschew technology, but there are loudspeakers in the trees brainwashing the members who pay to be here. We managed to get away and struggle up the next steep road, but now it's now badly cut up by their vehicles, and we eventually find the next hamlet, where we spend the night camping in the village school compound, having persuaded the locals that we had nothing to do with the temple down the road that they seemed very suspicious of. We woke to wonderful views of rising mist in the valley far below. We had been climbing constantly for 2 days now, up a hill 20 miles long, and I was beginning to flag, not only from the altitude, but also from the constant climb over rough ground. We stop a lot to get our breath and to look at the scenery, and occasionally Bernie pushes my bike up for a bit. It seems like the hill will never end. You can just see here how steep it is. And there is a road there, but you can't see it because it disappears so steeply. As we reach 11,000 feet, it starts to rain gently at first. And then we reach a special area called the Paramo. It's only found in South America in unfarmed areas above 11,000 feet. It's an ecosystem where there are strange plants, such as the Frejones, that take 100 years to grow 3 feet tall, and peat bogs that store most of the water used for Bogota. It's full of specialist flowers, and I've been really looking forward to getting to it. Unfortunately, as soon as we got to the top, the rain starts coming down like stair rods, and a thunderstorm starts directly overhead with no gap between the thunder and lightning. Very scary at the top of the mountain. So, without stopping to put on waterproofs, we sped down the other side, which thankfully turned into tarmac for a bit. Not for long, but the sides of the roads were crumbling down fast and our hands froze onto the handlebars. Looking down, we can see the sunshine in the valley far below. And after several hours, we eventually arrive in the sunny, hot town of Duitama. We were freezing cold, soaking wet and covered in mud. We must have looked like aliens to the gaily dressed locals wandering around the town in their t-shirts and sandals. We find a nice hotel, dry ourselves out and get some good food. We spent a couple of days resting in Duitama as Bernie recovered from the food poisoning we assume he got from the Tao community. Our bikes got some TLC too.
Over the next few days, we travel up and down mountains, around Laguna Tota, where they grow fields of onions, visit markets, then head to Toca, which takes us through some fertile farming land. Then slowly up another big climb. The tarmac gets thinner as we climb, and then eventually disappears altogether. The vegetation also changes with the altitude, starting with bright flowers, which is a good excuse for a stop for a while. Then at 12,000 feet, we reach the Paramo again. This time, in sunshine, although at this altitude, it's only just above freezing. We were really glad of our layers of clothing today. There are some beautiful yellow orchids growing right by the road, and the slow-growing frailjones that look like hooded monks in the frequent mist here, hence their name. Sarah crawled around on the boggy undergrowth, exclaiming with delight at each new plant discovered. The boggy ground is very acid and holds an amazing amount of water. This water is being lost as the farmers illegally start draining and cultivating the land. Over the next few days, we visit a number of towns, including Tuna, the capital of Boyaca region. The Spanish established this town after defeating the Musica people here. Every morning now, there is frost on the grass. Although it warms up during the day, we are permanently over 7,000 feet. We stop at Zipaquira to visit the Salt Cathedral. Then, after 6 weeks and 875 miles of cycling, climbing 63,000 feet, we arrive in Bogota, the capital of Colombia. Modern and full of terrifying traffic and fumes, and we get on a plane to Ecuador.
Arriving at Quito, Ecuador by plane from Bogota was a bit strange. As both cities are so high, Quito is at 9,000 feet. There was none of the usual decompression feeling as the plane landed. It was even more polluted than Bogota, which is saying something. So although it was fascinating to visit, we didn't hang around too long before heading out. Originally, we'd been going to head south, but we'd found some information about an eco route and lodge high in the cloud forest above Quito. So we decided to head north instead and do a circuit around Quito first. After the bustling city, the roads were quiet when we left Quito early in the morning and immediately started heading steeply up. The hills in Ecuador were in a different league to those in Colombia. Being a nation of active volcanoes, all the hills are incredibly steep, like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And the roads often went straight up, no zigzagging to lessen the incline. We slowly climbed up above the clouds until at 11,000 feet, we could look back down on Quito, far below, sitting under a haze of pollution. We had seen on the map that there was a village soon and hoped to stay there. But unlike Colombia, Ecuador was a tourist destination and the only hotel was fully booked. This left us no alternative but to carry on into the cloud forest in the hope of making it as far as the eco lodge, where we could at least camp if the worst came to the worst. Cycling through the rescued cloud forest was amazing. It was just full of flowers and birds. Obviously, it was a cloud forest, so it was raining most of the time, or if not, thick cloud. We must have crossed the equator at least once, but there were no signs of this on the rough track that we were on. The surface got rougher and steeper, and our legs were really tired. I was now reduced to pushing when I heard what sounded like giant mosquitoes buzzing around my head. A deep buzzing sound. They turned out to be hummingbirds, and the eco lodge was just around the corner. We stayed there for a couple of nights. They thankfully had a room, which, as it was so wet, just as well as it was so wet all the time. Our room was up a tree. We climbed up an internal staircase that spiraled around the tree trunk. In the morning, I opened my eyes and found a large, fat, red bird staring in the window at me. The place was buzzing with hummingbirds, and the centre guides took us on walks where they called in many of the other birds. and we looked at thousands of flowers, including wide ranges of orchids. At night, we could watch the newly discovered mammals coming in to eat bananas. At that time, we didn't realize how much of the forest in Ecuador had been felled for farming. This was just such an amazing place. We continued on our circular route, stopping in the next town to buy enough food for the 3 days we thought it would take us to get back. I must admit to being worried, as several people told us they thought we were mad to be going that way, but people often say that to us, so we ignored them. Only this time it turned out they were right. So, with full of confidence, we set off with 3 days worth of food and 1 emergency meal, luckily. We had barely started when we went down a hill so steep, I thought I was going to tip over the handlebars and just hoped that I wouldn't have to stop, as I couldn't. We camped for the first night on the football pitch of a tiny village after asking permission. The main family came out to greet us and we all shook hands. Then a young boy adopted us and ate all our biscuits. He was fascinated with my writing, and although he didn't speak English, he was watching every word that was written down, and I was delighted when he recognized the name of his village as I wrote it down so he could read.
The only way on from the village after crossing the river was deep in mud from the cows. Part of the road had washed into the river, so no vehicles could go across. We wrapped our only shoes and feet in cling film as makeshift Wellingtons and squelched our way through. Then the climbing began. For the next 3 days, we pushed our bikes up the hill that was too steep to ride. We both had to push 1 bike at a time, then walk back down for the other one. So we walked 3 times as far in the end. As there was no traffic, we could just stop in the road when exhausted and brew up some tea. Sarah had put her glasses on at this point and realized the reason our powdered milk was so lumpy and our tea so filling. She'd been using the bread flour. The forest was amazing with flowers and bromeliads everywhere. And going so slowly, we had time to look around, and we saw mammals and amphibians. If you can imagine being in a very hot sauna and pushing with all your might at a heavy object for 6 hours a day, that is what it was like. It was a full body workout. We had never been so tired. Very occasionally, we passed a small farm with 5 or 6 cows that they had milked by hand, and we saw 1 or 2 motorbikes, but most of the time we were totally on our own. We had realized by now it was going to take at least a day longer than we thought we had so we had to start rationing our food. Not good when you're using so much energy. We camped where we could find a flat bit of grass. Then the second evening, the rain started hammering down, and ironically, we were running out of water. We came across a slightly larger village. So while Sarah was knocking on a door to ask if we could camp on the school playing fields, I filled up our bottles from the water pouring off the roof. Well, needs musts. We put up the tent in an area that was already several inches deep in water, and somehow managed to cook supper and have a good night's sleep. In the morning, the clouds parted, rewarding us with a magnificent view. We had no real idea where we were on the track and set off again, expecting more climbing. But thankfully, after a couple of miles, the track headed downwards and kept on going down for the next 30 kilometers. It was like a miracle. Better still, when we finally emerged on the road at the bottom, there was a cafe. Talk about tightening your belt. We had both lost a lot of weight. It had been really tough, but I wouldn't have missed it for the world. We will stop there, as none of the other parts of Ecuador that we saw came anywhere near the beauty of this natural cloud forest. I'm now just going to play you a short video of a
Very noisy.
Of a very noisy place that gives you the idea of what it was like in Zappatoka when at 4 in the morning we were woken up to the sound of the band coming round the corner. And then there's a short interval of one of the whitewater rivers we crossed. And then it goes into the Fino Paso horses at Galan.
I just apologise for the quality of the video because it was taken on my phone at early hours of the morning.
Caballos hacia la tarima, caballos a la tarima.
It just gives you some idea of the noise and everything that was going on at the
In every town.
in every town that we visited, the village that we went to in South America.
All day and all night.
So I hope that you enjoyed our talk, and you can see a lot of our other travels, as Steve said, on ragmorleycycles.com. If you've got any question, which we were happy to answer them.
Wow, well, thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic. A few people are still typing a few things in the chat. I've got a couple of the questions that have been asked so far, but just to give people a little bit of a chance to ask any other questions. You've actually inspired me. I reached out to the bookshelf behind me. This is a book called Colombia's Pasión, which is a book about professional cycling in Colombia. And seeing the images that you gave me, it just reminded me of something that the author, Matt Rendell, says. Where was it? It's talking about the sort of history of Colombia, especially the more recent history with Pablo Escobar and where Colombia is kind of seen on the world stage. It says, if history had taken a different path, the word Colombia would instantly evoke brightly colored orchids, hummingbirds, and amphibians. The biologist E.O. Wilson has written that Colombia should be counted as one of Earth's mega diversity countries, with fauna and flora rivaled in richness only by Brazil. And that was exactly what I was thinking of as I was watching that. I was like, I was writing some notes as well. The only note I've written is go to Colombia. Okay. So right, so looking at the Q&As, there's a few questions that popped up in the chat. Matthew Holmes was the first to ask a question. He was wondering, what sort of weight were you carrying each day? What was the sort of
Too much. And
Too much.
We never carry. We carry a lot less now.
I think we were the bike, together with all the 4 or 5 days worth of food, came to nearly 40 kilos, 45 kilos, I think, at one point. So it was quite heavy. I mean, I only weigh 70 something, so it's an awful high proportion of my body weight to have to push up the hill. So
yeah, you could see from the photos, you could get a real set. It just looked hard. And I think one thing about fat bikes is they actually look heavier than they are, don't they? So it made it
Yeah,
look,
yeah.
They're on those rough roads, they're actually a lot easier to cycle than a bike with thin tires. You would find it harder with a 50 mil tires. You would find a lot harder to pedal on those roads than the fat bikes.
On pictures, you can't really see how rough the roads were, but most of the time, once we set off road, it was really big rocks and things we were cycling over. It was hard pushing over all the time. Sort of, which is why I can see
a
someone
few
saying,
people are
why that
asking.
bike?
So Caroline Burrows and also Florence B are also asking why you chose fat bikes rather than touring bikes. Did you know in advance about the quality of the roads? Or
because 15 months before we had done we had done the Great Divide from North America down the spine of the Rockies. We had seen fat bikes in Canada, and I hired one and tried one for the day, and I suddenly realized how wonderful they are. And so when we got back to the UK, I built us a pair of Surly Moonlanders. And
we were on Thorn's ordinary touring bikes when we did the Great Divide.
With 52 mil tires.
And I had a really bad accident. We were off for a month and I couldn't remember anything, quite a long time. And so Bernie thought if I was sitting on a fat bike, I might be safer. I still managed to fall off the fat bike, I have to say. It's my thing.
But they are on really rough ground. They are much better. And certainly when we went to Chile and Argentina, when we went across the Andes there, the volcanic ash and the gypsum that you get in the roads is so fine that, you know, on anything less than a 4.5 inch wide tire, you just sink into it. But we were able to just cycle down the side of the volcano at 40 kilometers an hour on those. Fantastic.
So on that kind of subject, a couple of people have asked about punctures and punctures and spare tires. What
we had I think 5 punctures in all, but they were all on the roads due to the you get when the lorry tires break up, you get all these tiny metal bits come out of the tires, and they caused all our punctures. When we were off road, we didn't have a single puncture. So although we have tubes in the tires, and although we'd fixed the 5 punctures we had, as soon as we got off road, we didn't have any more. We didn't have any in Ecuador at all.
Wow, managing to get around a whole tour in a country without any punctures is
well.
Like you should be awarded medals for that kind of.
Which was 4,800 kilometers. We had 1 puncture each,
and that was on the road again.
Wow. Okay. A few folk are also asking about. Martin Smale is asking, would your route be passable on hybrid tires, or would your wide tires be essential? I think you've answered that question, so I think Martin must be.
I mean, other people were riding 50 mil tires around the place, but it's just a lot harder.
And we now tour on much smaller tires.
Only 75 mil now.
Yeah.
Still quite big. Sorry, I'm just reading the questions. Florence is asking, where would you refill water bottles, and did you ever have any sort of panics about water and things?
There's quite a lot of water in Colombia and Ecuador, and we always carry filter pumps with us whenever we go on tour. So we're always pumping water out of streams, but also in some places, even the bottled water we would put through our filters before we drank it. But
India, for example,
yeah. We had 3 liters on each bike, plus we had a 10-liter bag that we could fill if we were going to be worried about it. But actually, although I did fill the 10-liter bag off the drain pipe off that roof, I then subsequently pumped the water out of there clean into the bottles for us to use following day.
And what filters were you using for that?
Then we had Catadine minis. We had 1 each, but they are quite hard to pump, and in some areas where there's a lot of gravel in the rivers, they block up fairly quickly, and you have to keep cleaning them out. And it can take an hour to pump 3 or 4 liters of water. So actually, we've just changed over to the Msr Guardian. The Msr Guardian's a very heavy filter, and it weighs the same as the 2 cathodines that we used to take, but we only take the 1 filter, and it is just so much easier and nicer to use. Unbelievable. It's very expensive, but it's lovely.
I guess that's one of those things where it costs a lot of money when you buy it, but at no point do you ever regret spending that money.
That's right. Yes.
Great. Right. I just check. So there's no other. Yeah. There's no other kind of questions from the audience, but I had a couple of questions, and so I'm going to ask them. When you were traveling around Colombia and Ecuador, they're both countries that are they've had quite a lot of political kind of turmoil, and Colombia very famously has kind of come out from underneath the kind of the shadow of the drug trade in very recent years. Did you get any sort of sense of that? Was that something that the people spoke about with you, or was that?
When we arrived, the ceasefire had only just happened, and so it's still a sort of vacuum, and so it was a really safe time to go, because everyone had just disarmed. And I believe now that the drug lords have taken over a lot of what was controlled by FARC. And so there is, so I'm not 100% sure of how things are now, but people are still traveling there. We never went out at night. I mean, if we were cycling, we made sure we were in wherever we were going by dark. And the same in the cities particularly. We didn't meet people who had been mugged, but they were drunk at night wandering around the streets. I think you just have to be sensible about it, and just realize where you are. You're not at home. And once or twice when we were out and about, we were asked by people if we'd seen the police recently, and I always said yes, because I wasn't quite sure if you said no, that then a gun would come out or a knife or something. So you have to have your wits about you, but we didn't feel, apart from that one time, we didn't feel unsafe.
Okay, that's really interesting. And did you get a sense of the change of land use that's happening there as well? It seems to be that the way that agriculture is structured in Colombia and Ecuador is changing a lot from like a peasant farming kind of model. I'm using that term advisedly, apparently that's the correct term for the type of farming.
Well, we saw some areas, particularly on our walk up into the mountains, that had been sprayed by the government from planes to kill all the drugs. So you saw vast areas that had just been wiped out.
Oh wow! Okay.
So they had a policy a few years ago of trying to give land back to the indigenous people, and they gave 4. I think it was 4 hectares to each of the peasant people who used to occupy and farm the land. And so there were lots of these sort of 4 hectare blocks, which people were trying to scratch a living on. But most of them, they had just sold the land back to the big landowners who had these very large estates and just were creaming it in, basically. So.
Okay. Anne is asking, how did you manage to take a siesta in the afternoons, and where did you go?
I was wondering that when I said it. I think we just hung around in a cafe or something, if there was one, or under a tree, and until the heat of the day had gone, and we just sort of have some water and just stay out of the sun. I mean, it wasn't a lying down siesta, or if we'd got somewhere early enough, we'd just stop cycling for the day and book into a hotel and just stay there until the following morning.
Yeah, it's
in the small villages where I mean, often, there were just a load of really cheap huts, wooden huts, and there was nowhere to go. There was nothing to do, not much to see. So you'd sort of turn up, and I'd write my blog for a bit, and we were exhausted and hot. And then if we were lucky, we could find something to eat that evening. Not always. It wasn't easy, particularly in the north.
And I think we've got one more question from Matt Holmes again. He's asking what piece of equipment could you not be without on that trip?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I mean, but you've got to have a bike to get about on. I mean, the pieces of equipment that I find most useful are the water filter and obviously a small toolkit so that I can repair anything on the bike. Mm-hmm. But I mean, our bikes are made to be and designed to be as reliable as possible, which is why we use things like roll-off gearboxes and so on, so that we don't really have failures while we're actually out on tour, as long as they're maintained properly before we go.
And
would you answer the same, or would you have a different answer?
Me? Camera.
Which is, I absolutely agree. Like,
and the internet to be able to look up what all the plants are.
Another question that got lost in here. Is there any stuff that you took with you on this trip that you've decided not to carry anymore?
Yeah,
a lot.
Most of it. Yeah.
Most of it.
When we go now, we bike pack. We don't have panniers. Mm-hmm. We really cut back. I mean, mainly because we're not getting any younger, and I can't get up the hills with that much weight on. So when we went up England off road this year, or last year, we carried almost nothing with us at all.
I've cut down the before food. I was carrying 26 kilos of kit, and I'm now carrying 18. So
and mine is even less.
And Sarah's is about 13. So we've cut it down a lot, and mainly by spending money, I suppose, on lighter weight tents, getting rid of stuff that we don't really need. And the last trip, we didn't take a stove or any cooking equipment. We just
our 2-man tent weighs 1 kilogram.
Wow. Yeah.
And it survives. I mean, we use it every night on our last trip, and it's very good.
I guess I'm sure a lot of the audience will kind of agree. Quite often, spending a little bit of time just taking stuff out of your kit, all of a sudden, that makes the actual cycling part like way more enjoyable, absolutely way more enjoyable, and just a little bit of attention to detail on that just improves the whole journey.
Well, we've been through over 12, 13 years an iteration process of continuously improving our kit, and a lot of it is because things do change and they develop as over time and technology improves. And you talk to people and you suddenly find things. I mean, the tent that we carry is a Durston, which is designed for backpackers. It's not designed for cyclists. And so it as standard, it doesn't come with poles. So you're designed to be used with walking poles. Mm-hmm. But I made a couple of poles to fit the tent, and you can buy poles from them as well. But it's a really first-class tent, which is unusually designed, but it maximizes the space you can use in it. So
that's fantastic. Could you just repeat the name of a couple of people have asked what kind of tent it is? Can you repeat the name?
Durston, Durston. Okay.
Yeah.
If you just put Durston gear into Google, you'll find it.
He doesn't make that many tents a year. I mean, he was just a guy who designed a walker who designed it.
There's a few quite similar designs out there now that kind of rely on trekking poles and weigh as much as an angel's whisper, but are actually quite robust. And I guess you can then have tent poles that you can lengthen or shorten to fit in your kit as well, which is really nice.
Well, he has just upgraded them to 2 even lighter versions. So I think you can now get a 2-man tent for about 600 grams or something.
And we have used different tents. when we did the TA in New Zealand, we used a tarp that we learned how to do at the Cycle Touring Festival.
Yes, I see. Anne Wilson, who's asked some questions, taught us how to make tarps. So I made my own tarp.
And we even used that when we canoed for 3 days down the river, and we didn't have our bikes to hold them up at that point, so we had to use the canoe paddles.
Oh, wow. How did you get on with the black fly in New Zealand?
We didn't have any at all.
Oh, wow. Okay. You must have been blessed somehow.
We've had them in Australia, but we haven't had them in New Zealand.
I think they drowned in New Zealand. There was rather a lot of rain.
Oh, okay. Caroline wants to know, Sarah, did you have a particular favorite flower?
Oh, yeah. It was the one I was looking at the time. Well, this is my favorite, my very best. I think it was the little, there was a picture of a little orchid, tiny little orchid on the back of a leaf. And it was only when our guide turned over the leaf that I found the orchid there. And it was only a couple of centimeters long, and it was absolutely beautiful. So I think that might have been one of my many favorites.
Caroline's responding, all flowers are favorite flowers.
Yes.
Richard would like to know how you navigated your route.
Well, I create the routes with a GPX file on my phone using a program called Oryx Maps, which only works on Android phones. And it uses OpenStreetMaps as a base map, which is the Oryx Maps only costs about €5 to buy. And the maps are free because they're open source. And we found in South America that the OpenStreetMap was better than the maps available on any other app. So I looked at Google, Maps.me, Komoot, and all these others, and the OpenStreetMaps in South America was way better and had a lot more information on it than any of the others. And I just plot a GPX for it the next day, and we just head off. And sometimes we follow it, and sometimes we don't. And
you can look at the satellite thing of an area, so you can see if there's a road there or not, or a track, because it's not always on a map.
And do you have a device on a dedicated device on your bars to navigate with?
Yes, I mean, I clip my phone. I've got a quad lock on the handlebars, and I just have the phone on the quad lock. So,
and we put it on airplane mode so that we're just using it for navigating.
Yeah,
and the batteries, and I have a battery pack, 13,000 milliamp hour battery pack that. With that, I can last about 4 days.
And I have the same thing on my phone, but I have my phone off. So if his phone runs out of battery, we can switch to mine and get another 4 days.
The phones we use are Samsung S21s now, which are waterproof. So
that's detailed on your blog, which I've just put a link to in the chat again, because some folk are asking about links to your blog, and you've got a section, I haven't read it, on maps, GPS tracking, and links. I can see it just there. So I'm sure that the details are there. Interesting that you're talking about keeping charged as you go. There's actually a section about batteries and staying charged next week on Saturday at midday, which look on the Cycle Touring Festival website, and all the details will be there, and sign up there. Right, I think that's it. I think we've rattled through a lot of questions there, and we've had incredibly inspiring and very motivational talk there. I'm almost about to open a web browser just to buy tickets to Colombia, and I'll just leave my family.
I would really recommend it.
It's a fabulous place to go.
It's a people, and it's such a noisy place.
But you need to get out of the cities.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I don't know how we do a round of applause, but let's just imagine you can hear an enormous round of applause. We've had almost 100 people in the audience today, which I'm reliably informed by Laura is very good numbers. She used like capitals for very good numbers. So thanks a lot for coming, everyone. And thanks again.
Thanks for listening.
Yes, thanks for listening.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks for your talk, and see you all again soon.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.